Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Terrence Duncan, and today we're going to talk about the research question basics. Just a quick recap. The first part of our lecture, we looked at the background of the problem, which was the foundation of the entire dissertation. Then we moved to the problem statement, where it's a brief paragraph, no more than 250 words, that addresses what the problem will be studied for the duration of your dissertation. And then we move to the purpose statement, which looks at why are we conducting the study and identifying the target participants that we will interview or survey for our study. Just a brief recap about alignment. We noted that alignment starts from the decomposition from the problem statement. So the problem statement sets the table for the duration of the dissertation. There is connectivity intentionally by design. So what you do moving forward after the problem statement continues to provide that connectivity. Think of it like a bridge. You want to make sure that that bridge is straight and narrow and that it's easily passable. And so that is what the problem statement is going to be like, and how it's going to continue to evolve for the duration of your dissertation up until you do the final paragraphs of writing about your conclusions and recommendations for future study opportunities. You also have to keep in mind, too, that the problem statement sets the tone. So everything connects back to the problem statement. Even your literature review, which could be anywhere from 35 to even 60 pages of material, your problem statement has to be present throughout your entire dissertation. So to make that intentional connectivity, we're going to go from the purpose statement to the research questions. And so things to keep in mind is that they're counterintuitive perspectives, and it is also a systematic investigation of phenomenon through observations, as well as an analysis of existing problems from existing literature. So how do we create alignment of the research question? We have to note that the research questions are not interview questions. And this is a common mistake that I see not only with my doctoral students, but even with some of my doctoral candidates. And so we'll talk about that a little bit later, but the research questions are a continuation from the purpose statement, which is a continuation from the problem statement. The research questions address the approach from the purpose statement, and I provided a quick little background as far as how the alignment and connectivity occurs. Stated before, the background of the problem is your foundation. The problem statement is the what. The purpose statement moves into the why. Before you do your research questions for your research outline, your prospectus, or your actual dissertation, make sure that you conduct a thorough literature review. The reason being is that you want to see, is evidence scarce? You want to ask questions that are probing about the problem itself, but you also want to make sure too that you are digesting that from the research that you have searched throughout. So whatever databases, whatever journals you're looking at, that's going to really help you develop the appropriate research question for your study. Conflict and results of the literature require an investigation. So don't continue to find research that aligns with you personally or professionally, because that creates bias. So you want to make sure that you are looking at it at all angles and seeing, are there certain questions that wasn't addressed at a prior study, whether it's at the dissertation level or was it at the research level from a peer-reviewed journal? And then you want to start asking questions relative to the gaps in the literature. So again, if this is something that you're looking at while you're working on your research outline or your prospectus, you want to look somewhat at the end of a dissertation or some of the studies that you're going to pull and see what potential gaps in literature has been identified, and did the author or authors address those gaps? If those gaps have not been addressed, then it will behoove you to consider to incorporate those particular gaps into your study as a research question. Qualifications of phenomenon. Just that it's almost like a wordplay, but dysfunctional is actually functional, bad is good, and also distinguish exceptional from mediocre research. And these mean that you want to look at it from almost one extreme to another, and those are some of the probing questions that you can develop just from those levels of extremity. So now you have created a couple of research questions in mind, and you want to narrow the scope of the potential research questions before you incorporate them into your study. The first thing you need to do is you need to remove ambiguous verbiage, meaning that you want to make sure that you're writing it clear and concise and that it doesn't have any vagueness involved. You also want to ensure that the target population and identification of potential participants are included into the research questions. And so again, this is another way how you'd establish the difference between a research question and an interview question. The interview questions, you're going to ask those potential participants. However, in the research questions, you are including the participants as part of the question. Location and geography makes a difference too. So if you are conducting a survey, a quantitative survey in the southeastern region of the United States, you will look at somewhere in your research question. And also you will review existing frameworks and relative research questions, meaning that you shouldn't be just coming out with these research questions out of thin air. You should base this based on your research, look at other dissertations, look at different research articles to really see what frameworks did they use, and was some of those research questions helpful in the development of your research questions for your study. And again, just wanted to capture the difference between a research and interview question. On the left, you'll see that the research questions will summarize the main inquiries for data collection, whereas on the right, the interview questions, you will ask those participants in your study or survey. And so again, you recall the prior slide, the research questions, you're going to have more questions associated with the target population or actually the demographic region. You're not going to have those type of questions in your interview questions. So we want to look at the difference between qualitative and quantitative research questions. And so this goes back to the purpose statement. You may recall in that lecture, we talked about, the purpose of this qualitative single case study is to explore blah, 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 or the purpose of this quantitative linear regression study is to examine blah, blah, blah. So in a qualitative study, your research questions will explore perceptions, feelings, themes, and ideas. Whereas in the quantitative, you're going to examine measurable variables, predictable outcomes, and they are relationship based. So you'll have your independent and your dependent variables provided within the scope of your research questions. Additionally, it's an appropriate selection of your research method that aligns with essential research questions to address. So, as you are working on your problem statement, you identify what you went from the broader perspective, from the general problem, then you went down to the specific problem. Now you identified the purpose of your study, your target participants, and now you're going to develop the questions based on the selection of your research method and design. So as you are developing your research questions from a qualitative method, there's several areas to consider, and this is not all inclusive, but to consider, are they interpretive questions? And are they explorative and seeking understanding? Are you providing comparative questions based on a central phenomenon? And are they open-ended? And these are typical traits that you see with qualitative research questions in a dissertation. On the quantitative side, some of the traits that you'll see in those research questions that is structured in nature, it's closed-ended and it's linear. So remember how we talked about removing ambiguity, and quantitative research questions, they're very, very precise. By the nature of the questions that you're going to provide. You're going to specify the dependent and the independent variables, as well as refraining from simple yes or no questions. Finally, you'll create a distinction when developing your research questions. When you're doing a quantitative research question, you have to have a hypothesis. So to incorporate a hypothesis in a research question is basically a statement to prove or disprove, which is expressed in two values, a null and alternative hypothesis. And what that does, it evaluates the relationship between the dependent and the independent variable. That data which is produced occurs through the test of statistical value. You do not do that in the most qualitative studies, and unless you're doing certain types of qualitative method designs. But for the most part, your statistical data is going to come with the quantitative side of the research method. And also it is known as the testing the significance of the variable. And so depending on the design approach, you will look at certain data output to make a determination of the significance of the independent variable and how it influences the dependent variable. So just wanted to provide you some tips for developing research questions. You want to stick between 2 to 3 for a dissertation. That's the typical range under most scholar practitioner and leader model dissertations. to have no more than 3. Usually what I see from the prospectus and even from the outline version, I usually see 4 or 5. That's too many questions to address. And again, the biggest thing is for anybody working on a dissertation is that you want to do it correctly, but also be able to get in and get out at the fastest way, the most expedient way possible, and do it correctly, obviously. You want to make sure your quantitative research questions have a null and alternative hypothesis. So if I am a chair or even as an instructor and I'm evaluating the work, if you do not have a null and alternative hypothesis with a quantitative study design, I'm going to reject it or make a comment stating like you need to identify what your null and alternative hypothesis may be. And so for every research question that you provide, you have to have a null and alternative hypothesis, meaning that it's a one-to-one relationship. So do not provide 3 research questions, but then have 5 different hypotheses to consider. It has to be a one-to-one relationship across the board. And it's a comparative analysis of different dissertations. So you need to look at different dissertations. You need to look at different tutorials, lecture videos, methodology books to be able to help you understand how to do an appropriate research question. Even though it seems like it's an easy assignment, it's actually more difficult than most people give it credit for because of the fact that you need to do it more than once. And what I tend to see is that a student will turn in an assignment and maybe look at it once or maybe even twice and feel like that's appropriate. Again, this is something that you're invested in. I've already had my dissertation. I've already published and things of that nature, and I've already conducted research before, but you are learning how to do this. And so if you're going to invest the time correctly by ensuring that you are doing it more than once, and make sure that you're taking the time to do research and trying to develop a research question. If you are a doctoral student, just understand that even no matter what class that you're in, you're still going to continue to revise numerous sections of your outline or your prospectus. And even as writing on the dissertation as a candidate, you're going to have some revisions. So I'm not going to say don't try to strive for perfection, but just know that it's going to get kicked back. There may be some corrections that need to be made or whatever the case may be. But the best way to mitigate against that is to try to rewrite the research questions more than once. I would say try to look at it, rewrite it at least 3 to 4 times, and then try to make a comparative analysis based on whatever documents that you're using to benchmark against to see, does this sound remotely similar to what they're providing for something that has already been published and accepted. And then finally, what does the research say? So are your research questions relevant to the scope of the study? And does it address certain gaps of the literature? Are they probing questions that are centralized to the actual problem statement itself? And here are the references that I use for this particular lecture model. If you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to give me an email or a call. Thank you very much.